Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fourth session of the day, where we talk about not a slightly controversial topic of how will banks survive the digital transformation. Joining in with us today, we have two rock stars who will hopefully entertain you, inform you, and share some knowledge in their respective fields over the course of the next 30 minutes. So I'll hand it over to you, Marc, and enjoy.
Thanks very much, Migs. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. So I will be your host for the sessions. I'm Marc Israel. I am the CEO and founder of a consulting boutique company here in Mauritius, covering mostly digital transformation. I worked for quite a long time on the continent, with Microsoft being their chief technology officer for a couple of years. And I'm very happy to welcome Jan. So Jan Valentine. So Jan, if you can introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Ian Valentine. I've had a varied career, mostly in the media industry, and then joined Huawei in 2014. Recently, for the last 5 years, I've concentrated on Africa, and I've been principal consultant for media and digital transformation across Africa, and helping both telecommunications carriers and the enterprise division, including the financial services industry, architect their digital transformations. So that involves a lot of stuff. Let's get right into it.
Cool. No, thanks, Jan. So you know, both of us probably are veterans of this industry. So you probably have a lot of stories about the banking sector, not only in Africa but across the world. So how do you see really the banking sector have changed, and how they're going to change in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so veterans, because there's no hair, right? I think we were joking about they brought us on to give perspective because we're supposed to be the old fogies. But no, that's an interesting question, because when you look at what's happened over our lifespans, or looking back over technology, and I always respect older people that keep up with technology, it's really good. We've seen so much change, and I think that brings perspective into what's going on at the moment in the banking sector. If you really think back, we've been through a number of transformations. We've had people, think it's very unusual to get telephone banking. Like I remember I built the call centers for Egg Bank, which was one of the first telephone banks in the UK at one stage. And it was a revolutionary new bank. And it was remarkable that you could do all of your banking without leaving the house, just by picking up the phone, speaking to an agent. Who does that today? Then the internet banking came along, and we all thought, right, online, we're online. And then apps came along. And now voice assistants and virtual assistants and AI are coming along. So I think we can learn a lot from these waves, and we could dig into it for a long time. But I think the big message is that once a wave starts, you can't fight it. You have to ride with the wave, and you have to decide if you're going to drown or if you're going to surf. And I think that's the choice that the industry is facing in the banking sector right now, and especially in Africa, because as we heard from some of the sessions earlier on, the transformation is going to be faster, quicker, and more significant on our continent.
And so you mentioned Egg, so moving from telephone to internet to apps. So have you seen the same kind of trends in other industries outside of banking and financial sector?
Yeah, I think, when I remember I was working with home shopping companies and building call centers for them in the 90s. And my big mantra to them was, the internet is not an either or. It's not like the internet companies will replace the existing companies. If you start a new internet company, then you still need the stock, you still need the buying, you still need the warehousing, you still need the delivery, you still need the payment system. So like the internet was a front end to the existing businesses that worked, right? And when you look at the transformations that are going on now with a new financial services ecosystem developing on blockchain and on DeFi, you have to think, is this an either or? Is it a situation where it's like the traditional players are going to get so disrupted by the new players that the new players will replace the old players? Or is it a situation where this is a new route to market? This is a new opportunity. This is a new way of doing clearing. This is a new way of interfacing between mobile money and fiat. This is a new way to do eKYC. This is, do you see it as just an addition to your core services which are still working, and then some of your core services are going to change. So like in retail, obviously people ended up shutting shops. E-commerce became much larger, and we're seeing that in the financial sector now with banks going branchless. We've seen branchless banks for many years in Europe, and banks in Africa are now focusing on it. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, because that's where I wanted to go, actually, because what we have seen is that in most, I would say, up north countries, so Europe and the US, mostly closing branches, where we're still seeing banks on the continent opening branches. So how do you feel about that strategy?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends what you're doing with your branch. And at the end of the day, it comes down to your profitability, doesn't it? So if you can make value out of your branch, and that could be diversification, it could be cultural, it could be that in certain cultural situations, for example, if you're going to recruit the unbanked and they're happy to line up and, like we do in Mauritius, and get a Mighty Money card at a mobile at a Mauritius Telecom shop. Well, why do I have to go to the shop for that? Well, the shop's already there. And so the banks can do a lot face-to-face, or they could add value to their stores. And culturally, people still may need face-to-face communications. But what it comes down to at the end of the day is the bottom line. What's your operational cost versus your revenues on a unit-by-unit basis? And how do you make your business more financially viable? And in some sectors, that mean you don't want to be keeping your bricks and mortar assets going.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's and you mentioned it's not an either or choice. I think it's both, and I think that what we are seeing actually in many industries, including financial services and banking and insurance companies, is the hybrid model. I think that we're talking a lot. We've talked a lot in the last 5-6 years about hybrid cloud and hybrid technologies. And I think the hybrid model where you still got branches and face-to-face.
I love hybrid for everything except cars. I think cars should be fully electric, but everything else should be hybrid. In the TV industry, we had the concept of OTT and broadcast. In the technology industry, in banking now, we've got hybrid, as in you've got your core legacy systems from an infrastructure point of view, and then you've got cloud and agile and DevOps on the outside. So hybrid, from a cloud point of view, you might have, a combination between your private cloud and your public cloud. So hybrid's a great word. I like the fact that you picked up on that.
Yeah, no, and I was actually wanted to know from you. So what you have seen is really what is the core technology or technologies that have really made the biggest difference in that transformation over the years, and probably trying to predict, although it's very difficult, but to predict what would be the next frontier and the next technology.
Yeah, so I think that depends on how far you zoom out, right? So we should probably zoom out, right, to 50,000 feet first of all. And the technologies are very clear. You've had communications technologies, then computing technologies, building on communications, and then you've got artificial intelligence or big data cloud. So this really maps some of Huawei's track. We started on communications, then we realized we needed computing at the end of every line, and then everywhere you've got computing, you put intelligence, and you see these macro level things happening. But as you zoom in a bit more and you look at the technologies that are changing, I think that, in the old days, there used to be a battle between networking technologies. Now there is not a battle between networking technologies. In the old days, there used to be a battle between computer architectures and operating systems. Now there's not a battle between computer operating systems and architectures. So over time, there are clear winners, and then everyone has to migrate to those clear winners. So the clear winners today are absolutely, staring us in the face. You have to look at mobile technology and communications technology in Africa as your user interface point. There's no point standing in the way of the fact that the majority of people in Africa are going to be interacting with financial institutions over the internet from their mobile phones, right? So number one is apps as a user experience. That's number one. Number two, you have to look towards the back, and you have to say, what do people with apps expect from an infrastructure? And that's a 24/7, constantly updated, constantly improved, DevOps-driven, agile development environment, where you don't get that on the sort of DB2 kicks, SNA architectures, that hide away in the dark rooms at the bottom of some institutions. So you have to then look at cloud as your way of getting around Moore's law and becoming infinitely scalable and agile. So cloud is obviously, one of the biggest technological enablers of that. Then I think when you look forward, go down even lower, you have to look at the component architectures. And the biggest change in component architectures we've seen is a difference in database architecture, because you and I will remember a worm. It used to be write once, read many times, or something like that. But that's basically what a blockchain is, but publicly distributed and publicly readable and immutable. So if you think of blockchain as a new database layer or a new distributed ledger technology, then you start seeing that this is a completely revolutionary new component that will, just like we've gone from proprietary databases to SQL databases to big data like Hadoop style architectures. Now the next data architecture that we can use, if it's appropriate, is distributed ledger. So that's going to have a huge impact. And then when you start, drilling down even closer to the technologies involved, then you start looking at the tooling. Things like Chainlink, things like Ripple that will link banks together, things like all the middleware that's available to put the links from legacy systems into the new blockchain architectures and smart contracts. So there's a lot to look at there, but these are some of the key ones I see.
Yeah. So and if you zoomed out and you zoomed in, we all know that. Yeah, we all know that the African landscape is seems somehow different. Okay, so the number of unbanked people is more than anywhere else in the world. Telecommunication system is not always available in far remote places. But on top of that, and I think that you mentioned that the fact that the banks should have a mobile strategy, because there's over 1 billion. I don't know. Maybe you know the number of cell phones currently in Africa, but anyway, the number of cell phone lines are.
Just take the population, multiply by 2, then no.
Okay, so it's close to 2 billion. Yeah, probably 2 billion. 2 billion cell phones.
It's not quite that, but you've got feature phones as well, but they can still access mobile money solutions.
And that's something maybe that was not planned in the discussion when we prepared it. But how do you see those feature phones? Because USSD was quite popular and make actually the popularity of M-Pesa, for example, in Kenya. So do you think that banks should invest into this old-fashioned technology of USSD?
Well, I think you have to look at again, it comes down to the economics of it. And whenever you look at mobile money, or if you like a banking environment or a new financial environment, you have to look at ecosystem theory. And ecosystem theory goes up, the value of the network goes up with the square of the number of participants. So with M-Pesa in Kenya, what was really important was to use USSD, the features in these feature phones from a non-graphical point of view to onboard as many merchants and payers as possible. Yeah. So any technology that gives you a leg up in that exponential growth curve that marketplaces go through is going to give you a long-term advantage. So you've got to use any technology to get on there. But from a long-term point of view, do I think that's something that I would invest in now if I was starting off? I don't think so, because the people I'm after, the merchants be on smartphones, the people I'm after in terms of larger balances and transaction sizes are on smartphones. The future is smartphones. So whenever you're building something new, you always want to bet on the future. And, pretty soon, these feature phones will disappear. I mean, smartphones become as battery efficient and more functional.
So coming back or staying actually on the mobile, but taking the smartphone angle. So can we say that one of the, I would say, survival rule for any industries and financial sector most prominently is having a mobile first strategy?
Well, I think in Africa, a bank that does not have either mobile first or parallel mobile, like we talked about branches and other infrastructure, is going to be the losers. I think we have to look at who are the winners and who are the losers. In a situation where we know there's going to be great change on the continent, and there's going to be the biggest change globally in the financial services industry, probably on the continent of Africa, and innovation is going to be driven here. the certain, going back to our topic, will the banks survive? I think we should probably come back to this. Many of them will, and many of them will thrive on the change, but the ones that do will have the innovative hooks that let them surf along on the change, and mobile first is one of those. There are others as well. So the ones that sit and do nothing, they're the ones that end up, like probably just
not sure if this is only me. Oh, it's just Jan.
And the ones that win will be the bright stars of the continent going forward, and not necessarily new entrants. So mobile first, I think, is just one component of that. It's one component.
So mobile first is one. So what would be the second then?
Well, the second is actually thinking about what your journeys are, your business processes are, and your core businesses. So if you look at the changing landscape, when you look at some of the new DeFi applications, for example, when you begin to realize that interest-bearing current accounts and loans.
Can you define DeFi? Some maybe some people who don't know what DeFi thing, and they're just scratching their head.
So, yeah. Sorry about that. DeFi is an abbreviation of distributed finance. So it's the idea that things like Bitcoin and layer 1 type chains have a certain degree of functionality, and then if they have smart contracts, you can build new functionality like a programming language into those on top of those chains, and those become what's called dApps, or distributed applications, which are applications that work without trust and without a centralized authority. So you can take a network like Uber or Airbnb, and you can make that transaction between a rider and the driver, or a host and the traveler, without having to have that centralized organization, centralized database. So this is an application you build on top of blockchain technology. Now, what's happening in the financial space, and I'm sure most people in the audience know, is that people are now building on smart contract chains, and there are many different now, types of smart contract chains, distributed or DeFi applications, which comes back to what I was saying, which are doing all the traditional work of the financial services industry. So you can have a contract that says, I've got deposits and loans. You can have a contract that says, I've got insurance. You can have you can reproduce these financial services. So when we go back to that original question, is what else is changing in the banks? The businesses that they're going to get involved in, they have to say, is say a DeFi loans model. Is there a sector that I'm going to continue to lend money to? Yeah, probably is. Businesses, but the retail loans, are they going to disappear? If that's going to disappear, then do I diversify away from offering that, or do I continue to offer that in competition with DeFi loans, or do I embrace DeFi loans as part of my portfolio? Now, I think the successful banks like Revolut and PayPal, other things like this, are embracing these new technologies alongside their traditional fiat businesses, and therefore they're getting that surfing boost from the transformation. So I think the second big thing that they have to watch out for is, what's your core business journeys? What are your core products? What are the customer journeys that you're taking people through?
But talking about, and I agree, completely agree. I think that's the whole thing about digital transformation, which, although it means digital and transformation, it's much more, it's a business transformation driven by digital, through digital, whatever you call it.
That's right.
So it's not an IT function, it's a business function.
That's right.
That means
back to business.
You need to look at all the different bricks and pieces of that business. Now, one of the issue that we may be seeing actually in that landscape is that when we talk about blockchain and DeFi and dApps, or the digital, the decentralized applications as well, is there is no legislation around that. Core and the regulators and the banking sector is very, very, looking at that, says, whoa, this is going too far, and this is going too fast. So let's go back to the pure basics. So how do you see legislation and regulations playing a role there, trying to accelerate that transformation, or not?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because some people say, well, let's create a, in Africa, we have a number of these sort of zones where you can sort of operate things outside of regulation and we can define the regulation afterwards. Somewhat one of the people in the previous session said regulation is neither good or bad because obviously it depends what the regulation is. When I think about regulation in this space, I think of it as predominantly very, very good if it's good legislation. So good legislation is good, bad legislation is bad. But the problem is that, like our lady from Kadana said earlier on, you can't just apply the old rules to the new space. So, but must there be regulation, and is regulation going to help? Yes, because you can't have people making huge gains on assets, for example, and then have no means to pay capital gains tax in the country. If, of course, a government is going to have an allergic reaction to that. And likewise, but if you take situations like foreign exchange, where you've got more efficient ways of doing things, cutting down transaction costs and speeding up the service, then that has to have a very light regulation because, basically you're wanting to encourage that because it creates everything that's better. On the typical, legislation that comes towards how these areas touch fiat and personal tax and whether we should embrace it or not, then you need to understand this new system as something that's new, not something that is just a reinvention of the old. I think we're going to have hybrid again. We're going to have regulation that has parts from other things like commodities regulation, monetary regulation, tax regulation, but have to be specially done. But overall, regulation is going to be a good thing because it's good regulation. It's going to legitimize everything and get everyone on the same page. Does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure. Opinion on legislation.
I think that we can spend probably a long time on that. I think it's a very hot topic in almost every country.
Yes, people are still working this out. People are still working this out.
Exactly.
But whatever you do, you can't just ban it. You can't just ban it. That's a stupid.
No, true. No, but if you see what's happening in Mauritius, for example, so for the audience as well. So we just had the budget speech last week. So and the Minister of Finance announced that
piloting
the bank was working on a digital currency. So that's something that will have we call that a stable coin, or probably it will be a stable coin. But that would change a lot of things. People may not realize that will change a lot of things. That will change remittances. That will change how bank exchange money, balance, credit.
I've been asked a lot of questions about the
currency. But there is a void sometime in regulation. When we say blockchain, for example, everybody's listening, and that's particularly in Mauritius, for example. If you say if you register a company blockchain, or in your mission statement, this is a blockchain, whatever, you go to a bank, you want to open a bank account, the bankers will look at you and says, blockchain. No, we can't do that. So there's a lot of regulation awareness. Okay, we're getting close to the end. And I know that we could continue for ages.
Wow, time flies.
Yes, it does, definitely. So I just wanted last word really on what could be the next frontier. So we talked about blockchain, we talked about mobile apps and decentralized apps, but what could be the next frontier?
Well, without a doubt, I think the next frontier is using machine learning and narrow AI in the financial services industry. I think this is a natural evolution of those zoomed out big waves that I talked about earlier on. But you can think of so many applications to it. Like, for example, the AML, or the anti-money laundering, fraud detection is already being used in many transactions. I had an issue the other day when I was trying to pay my credit card, and because I paid 2 or 3 times in a row, the rules said, hang on a sec, what's he doing? So already we're using machine learning and AI, but this is going to come much, much bigger because it'll affect the very user experience. And whenever you really dynamically change the user experience, you can do amazing things with adoption and with customer satisfaction and functionality. It's the difference between, you've seen some of these social media apps that you really use AI, they win every time over the other ones that are algorithmic. Yeah.
True. So and I agree. So it's just going beyond anti-money laundering or just finding patterns in numbers.
No,
it's really how do you engage customers? How do you shape
the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah. So there are lots of things, and I think that one of the advice, and I completely concur with you, is just
banks should be using
to invest.
we'll be using AI, a narrow AI to figure out what products and services and designing them. Like we can actually design products and services, to fit real data.
Sure. So thanks very much, Jan. So we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and so let me jump to the first one. So I think that we talked a little bit about it, but so we talked about legislation. So and I think that's a very long winding question. So we cannot go. But
there's an ecosystem question.
Yeah, there's an ecosystem which is interesting because you briefly mentioned the importance of the ecosystem, and Rajiv asked, so what are some key elements of the Mauritian ecosystems? But I would say even beyond Mauritius, of the banking ecosystem, the financial ecosystem that you see need to be improved.
I think when you look at ecosystems, people just talk about ecosystems because they're thinking about the dodo or the trees. And it's not. An ecosystem is a marketplace, basically. And in a marketplace, you have value that's generated on both sides. And then you have this cyclic effect, this chicken and egg effect. More of these, 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 more of these. And one of the things that is missing, if you wanted to, so you can define all sorts of types of ecosystem, but the thing that every ecosystem needs to get going is a forcing function, right? So if you have a forcing function on one side or the other, then this can push it up. Think about credit card adoption. If every shop took credit card, then everyone would end up carrying them. If everyone was carrying them, every shop would end up taking them. If you just leave it to, natural growth, then you get this exponential growth curve. So what's missing in Mauritius for some of these good ideas are forcing functions. And that comes back to central bank digital currency regulation and other things, where we can create forcing functions for certain adoption curves which are positive for the island.
Yeah, completely agree with you. So last question from the audience is, so talking about digital bank. So, what about implementation of digital bank in Mauritius and Africa? We haven't seen much.
It's funny.
What's your take on that?
Every bank, show me an analog bank. Analog money. The thing is, it's degrees of digital. This is what we're really talking about. But I think by digital bank, do they mean
probably online?
A bank without branches. Yeah, without branches. Digital bank. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is there room. Maybe the question should be rephrased: is there room for a new digital bank to be a new entrant in Mauritius? So I think the thing is, when you look at the adoption of institutions like Coinbase and some of these other big institutions, they don't take Mauritius seriously because of the small number of population, the size of the market. So if you're looking at them bringing it on or coming in, then we're a small market. Does that leave an open door for us to have a new entrant bank inside Mauritius? I think that's a risky business. I think I would prefer to see the existing institutions go fully digital, because if I was starting a bank, then I wouldn't be thinking of stopping in Mauritius. I'd be wanting to go continent wide, because in this new world, there are no boundaries, right? There are no boundaries. So we mustn't just think at a national level, especially for entrepreneurs and startups. We need to be thinking beyond that. So if you were to start a new digital bank, a better question would be, is there room for me in Africa? And the answer to that may be yes, but I wouldn't limit it to Mauritius. But maybe just transformation is the best path.
I completely agree. That beautifully closes our discussion. Thanks very much, Jan. And I think that's think local, build local, think global. I think could be the word of the
act local. Think local, act global. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. Thanks very much. That was a great
Thank
time.
You, Marc.
So, and I hand over to Migs or to anybody from the MAF team. Ciao. Cheers.